What are you hoping to come out of what is being called a historic NATO conference this year?
Well, I think there's two things here. One is obviously the NATO conference itself, but secondly, the rather amazing spectacle we've got of counter-briefing between the Defence Secretary and the Prime Minister about Britain's defence spending. Let's look at the NATO conference. I'm enormously encouraged that the Turkish government seem to have come to an understanding with Finland and Sweden. And who could have imagined 6 months ago that Sweden and Finland, historically neutral, would have been applying to join NATO and are going to be, I hope, warmly welcomed into NATO on a fast-track basis at this conference. And that's the doing of Vladimir Putin, who has made very clear to everyone in Europe the threat that Russia is posing to peace and stability in Europe. But then, of course, we've got the question of the funding. And the Defence Committee, under two Conservative chairs, but unanimously on both sides, have said for a long while we need extra spending on Britain's defences because, quite frankly, the rundown that's taking place, particularly the rundown in the numbers of the army, just is not acceptable. Ukraine has made that absolutely crystal clear.
Exactly. Look, there's a lot to get stuck into here, John, but I just want to, before we do some of the other stuff, just ask you, are you a little bit gutted at how good Boris Johnson actually looks on the world stage?
Well, I'm not entirely sure how you say it's looking good when he's actually, having promised in the election that he'd increase defence spending. The Defence Secretary has been out there briefing in the last few days about an increase in defence spending, very strongly supported on his backbenches, but also by the opposition. And yet Johnson then has just sort of waved that away. I'm not sure that's a definition of looking good, especially when the numbers of in the army are being slashed and taking us really below a safe level.
What I would say is, I really do think when you see him standing there with those world leaders like we're seeing at this NATO summit now, the lot of them listening on radio, the usual types, obviously Joe Biden, etc., Erdogan, Macron, all these people, I think the British public will think, actually, we've not got a bad one here.
Well, hold on a minute. Whoever is the British Prime Minister turns up at NATO summits and G7s, it goes with the job. It's what you're doing to actually, give substance to the discussions. And you're absolutely right. Britain is one of the major contributors of defence capability, but that is being hollowed out. We've been warning about this for several years, and from Johnson's comments to the reporters that I've seen, basically he doesn't acknowledge that and believes he can carry on in the same way without actually, for example, abandoning the cuts to the number of soldiers, which is absolutely disastrous. You've had senior army figures warning about this for several months.
And let's just look to the future, and there is a real prospect that Labour could indeed be the governing party in a couple of years at the next time of the general election. If that were to happen, what would you want to see? What would Labour be doing in the area of defence to bolster the United Kingdom against threats like Russia, like China?
Well, I think that, and this is where we certainly would agree with the current government, for example, providing encouragement and welcoming both Sweden and Finland into NATO, providing support into the Baltic countries who have been seriously threatened before and clearly feel under threat. I was in Vilnius in Lithuania only a few weeks ago, and they are very alert to the danger. And so we would certainly be continuing that policy, and also we'd be supporting, as indeed are the new Australian government, the AUKUS deal, which is looking also at threats in the Indo-Pacific area. John Healey has made very clear the position from the Labour front bench that we will need the defence spending that meets up to those commitments. And so I think we're seeing Labour moving in the same direction, as I said, the Defence Committee and the backbenches of both main parties.
And do you think Keir Starmer is the man to take you into the next general election and represent Britain on the world stage like Boris Johnson is currently doing?
No, see, I mean, the idea that Boris Johnson is a sort of world-leading figure, I mean, it may suit a political narrative, but it bears no relation to the facts.
I'm not hearing an endorsement for Starmer yet, John. I'm not hearing it.
Sorry, I can only do one sentence at a time.
I would have let him with that if I were you.
Absolutely. Keir Starmer stands absolutely in contrast to that, as someone who is cool and rational and is actually looking at the facts. Johnson is not only blundering around, but, for example, all these gestures of involving the Royal Navy in dealing with the refugee crisis across the Channel. When we did our report from the Defence Committee, Conservatives and Labour, people across the political spectrum, all said this is a ridiculous idea. And the military don't want it either. What we have is government by press release, government by gesture. I don't think that makes someone look like a world statesman. I think that, frankly, makes us look a bit of a laughingstock in the world, as well as the moves to sort of suddenly tear up an agreement that they signed only 2 years ago. None of that, however, should detract from, firstly, the quality of our armed forces, but secondly, also, the need for us to value that and to invest properly in equipment, but also in personnel. We're running short of sailors. We're certainly, and the government is proposing to slash the number of soldiers to a dangerous level. That's going to require a financial contribution. Frankly, Johnson should sort this out with Sunak and give some stability to our armed forces.
So, sorry to rush you, John. You know how it is. We've got obviously a bit pressed time.
You haven't. I've got to go to a meeting with the German Bundestag. Right.
Yes, you do, but only at 20 past. It's 18 past now, so you've got 2 minutes with me. Right, very quickly. The last time that Labour were in power, they dragged our armed forces into 2 unwinnable wars. How can you justify Labour being on the side of the armed forces now? Very quickly. I know you've got a dash, mate.
Sorry, the last Labour government, in which I was a defence minister for the first 4 years, once again we had to redress the cuts that had been done under options for change. End of the Cold War, the Conservatives slashed defence spending, cut the numbers of soldiers, ruined the recruitment programme, and we had to spend that period actually redressing that and also re-equipping Britain's armed forces. And it's the same with the Cameron government, with the nuclear deterrent. 6 years they did that around, and that's why we're facing serious problems in the nuclear submarine programme. The reality is, actually, from the days of Attlee and Bevan, it's Labour that backs defence. The Conservatives talk about it. We act.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.